Last week, we started an adventure in the book of Psalms, and together we're learning that the book of Psalms is really a book for all seasons of life. The Psalms are a collection of 150 of the greatest songs ever written. So I thought I'd take a moment and take a look at what the internet says are the greatest songs ever written according to popular culture. According to Rolling Stone magazine, here's what they are. Here's the top five. Number one is Bob Dylan, Like a Rolling Stone. Number two is the Rolling Stones, I Can't Get No Satisfaction. Number three is John Lennon with Imagine. Number four is Marvin Gaye with What's Going On. And number five is Aretha Franklin with Respect. And the list goes on from there. That's just the top five. I couldn't help but notice they missed a couple of pretty popular songs. For example, the most sung song of all time is actually Happy Birthday. Didn't make the list. And probably the most loved song of all time would be Psalm 23. Among literary scholars, poetry scholars, Bible scholars, Psalm 23 is regarded as probably the single greatest piece of literature ever written. And among Christians, Psalm 23 may be the most encouraging and the most frequently memorized chapter of all time. It's 6 sentences. That's all there is. 6 sentences make up Psalm 23. Those sentences are recited more at bedsides and gravesides in every season than any other set of verses. I want to read it today from the English Standard Version. That translation is probably the version you're most familiar with in terms of its wording. So let me read this for you. Psalm 23, verses 1 through 6. That's all it is, 6 verses. David writes, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever." This 23rd Psalm is a poem to learn from and I believe to live by, to let it sink into your soul. Because if the Lord is your shepherd, you'll have no wants, including food and drink, security, peace. You'll have no reason to fear, but you can face the world with faith and hope and the world to come with anticipation. Let's walk through it together line by line and examine each part of what David is expressing here. Let's start first of all with the context. That's always important. In his childhood days, David was a shepherd. He tended his father's sheep on the hillsides of Judea. And he knew what it was to be a good shepherd. And he knew the differences between sheep that were well cared for and those that weren't. David writes as a Middle Easterner. We are Westerners and we tend to think as individuals. That's the best way to say it. We read me and I and my, and we think of that being a personal statement. Easterners think more like a community. They think we, ours, us. Even when they see the I or the my or the me, and there are 11 of them in this poem. Even when they read those singular statements or pronouns, when they read in this poem, they see themselves not as being an individual, but they take that as a collective statement that's to the whole community. It's promises that are for all of us, not just for me as the person. They're promises for all of us. All of us get to experience this life with the shepherd. It's not just one individual. Well, David writes this psalm from the perspective of a sheep. What do we know about sheep? Well, we know there aren't any nations who use the sheep as their national symbol. America's national symbol is the eagle. Great Britain has the lion. Russia's is the bear. Scotland's is the unicorn. Go figure. But no nation has ever designated the sheep as its national symbol. Why? Probably for the same reason that no major sports team has selected the sheep as their mascot. Not even a high school team chooses the sheep. It's because sheep are not very bright. In fact, they're kind of dumb. and they're also defenseless, and they're also very dependent. But if the Lord is your shepherd, guess what? You are sheep. So let's look again at David's opening line, which summarizes the whole song. This is the main point of all that he's saying. Verse 1, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. When the Lord is my shepherd, all my wants are taken care of. All my needs are provided for. This is the world of the sheep. The other 6 statements that David makes show how this promise is true. Statement 2 says, in verse 2, he makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. You've all heard the saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink, right? Well, the same thing is true for a sheep. You can lead a sheep to the water, but you can't make them drink. And you also can't make a sheep lie down in the pasture if it doesn't want to. Sheep only lie down when they've had plenty to eat, when they've quenched their thirst, when they feel that they're not threatened by any wild animals or disturbed by any biting bugs. Then they can settle down and they'll bed down in the field. You know, the barking of one stray dog can cause an entire herd of sheep to jump up and run off if they're not stopped by an alert shepherd. He makes me lie down. That statement makes it sound like there's force involved, but what David means is he settles me down. He settles me down in green pastures where I can then be at peace and lie down in contentment. The climate in Israel is semi-desert. There are only 3 months of green pastures. For sheep, it means they spend a lot of time in brown pastures with dried out straw instead of pastures with tasty green grass. Well, the Lord settles his sheep in green pastures by leading them to places of refreshment that they couldn't find on their own. Israel doesn't have fenced-in fields, and they don't have big agro farms and cultivated hay fields. The sheep are led out of the village every day to graze out in the wilderness. In the north, the shepherds will take their sheep up to 8,500 feet elevation to find green pastures in the summer. In the winter, they feed down at lower levels. But David's saying, because the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He settles me down in green pastures. The second part of that sentence is that he leads me beside still waters. The shepherd has to plan his daily schedule around the availability of water in the middle of the day. Traditional grazing rights, relationships between shepherds, the power of a shepherd's tribe or village, they're all part of deciding where to graze and where to water the flock. If you don't own the well or the stream or the property where the water is located, you need to be on good terms to have permission of the people who own that so that you can water your flock in the middle of the day. The good shepherd, David says, leads me. He doesn't drive me. He leads me. The shepherd does this by walking slowly ahead of his sheep and either playing his own little 10-second or so tune on a little pipe or a little flute, or he'll sometimes sing a unique little song or a call is what it's known as. Some little thing that he'll hum or sing that repeats itself over and over again. And what happens is the sheep end up knowing their shepherd's voice and their tune, or his pipe, his flute, whatever it is that he's playing. They know his voice, if you want to think of it that way. Could be literally his voice, but it could also be the tune or the song or the words or the melody that he plays. In this region of the world, shepherds will gather around a watering hole where all their sheep mingle and drink and rest all at the same time. When a shepherd decides it's time to leave, he gives a call, and all of his sheep will immediately separate themselves from the rest of all the mixed up flocks and all the herds that are gathered there, and they will follow the voice of their shepherd wherever it is that he leads them away from the bunch. The phrase, he leads me beside still waters, is literally beside stilled waters. Sheep are afraid to drink from moving water. Even if it's shallow, they don't like drinking from a moving stream. They seem to know instinctively, even though they're not very bright, they seem to know instinctively that if they get caught in that moving water, their wool will soak it up so fast and they will be powerless to ever get out of that water. They'll drown. The weight of their wet wool will pull them under and they'll drown. So for them, moving water is something to be terrified of. So what happens is when there's a stream and the water is moving, the shepherd will kind of dig a little trench back away from the stream. Just kind of picture like a little ditch that leads away from the stream back off to the side. And what happens is that little channel allows water from the stream to kind of work its way up into that channel. It's not running anywhere. It just kind of goes into that little channel, into that little ditch, and it sits there. It's not moving. That is where the sheep will line up and drink, all along that channel that he just dug out for them to drink from. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He settles me in green pastures. He leads me beside stilled waters. Then the third sentence that David says, verse 3, he restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. In Hebrew, the first part of this sentence reads, he brings me back. In his book titled The Good Shepherd, author Ken Bailey explains it this way. He says, this makes clear that the sheep is lost and the good shepherd is obliged to go after it, to find it and carry it back. He also says that the shepherds in the Holy Land have told him that once a sheep knows that it's lost, it tries to hide under a bush or a rock, and it begins to just quiver and shake and bleat out this little cry. And the thing is, the shepherd has to locate it quickly, or some wild animal might hear that cry and come and kill the sheep. Well, on being found, once the shepherd finds this sheep and he gets it out of the place where it's been lost, it's usually too traumatized to even walk back. It's just too shaky and too shaken up, and the shepherd has to carry that sheep back to the flock or back to the village. This is why the shepherd has to lead the sheep back to the paths of righteousness, or to the right paths. A lost sheep can't find its way home. As a lost sheep, my only hope, your only hope, is the shepherd. Once I've strayed off the path, he has to pick me up and carry me to safety. I can't do it on my own. I can't find my own way. I need the shepherd. All the villagers know the good shepherds are the ones that never lose a sheep. The good shepherds are the ones that always bring back their lost ones. In Middle Eastern villages and in the culture there, there's a very strong honor and shame culture. Honor is everything. No one wants to be shamed. No self-respecting shepherd would leave his lost sheep. He has a reputation to uphold. So the good shepherd finds the lost sheep, and he picks them up and he carries them home. Yes, for their sake, yes, he does do that because he loves them, but it's for his name's sake too. You see, our good shepherd's name wouldn't be worth much if he didn't look for his lost sheep and carry them home to safety. Let's review so far. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He settles me in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He brings me back from the wrong path, and he leads me on the right path for his name's sake. The most important line in the poem, I think, is the fourth one. We're going to look at this one in two parts. First, the first part, the first half of verse 4. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Let's look at that one first. In certain places in the Holy Land where there's sandstone that's been carved by wind and rain for centuries, there are these deep, dark valleys of danger that are no joke to sheep or to people. The people that live there that are familiar with these things know very well of the dangers that these passages and these routes of travel can hold. If you've ever heard of the city named Petra, it's one of those places. If you haven't heard of this city, you should really look it up and read about it. Petra is one of those places where the buildings are built right into the sand walls. They carved out spaces to live in. And some of the building fronts look like an ornate structured building, but it's just carved out of sandstone. I've got a couple of pictures I'll show you in this. They'll come in here in just a second. This first one is a picture of the city of Petra, built into the sand walls of an ancient area in Jordan. Now, this second picture shows how this narrow canyon where this building front is located, you get a sense of how narrow this passage actually is and how close the walls are to one another. Take a look at this one. If you notice in that second picture, the walls come in so close together, they really keep out the sun. The sun might only shine in there for a few minutes out of the day. But the really bad thing is that they're so close together that whenever there's a flood, there's no place else for the water to go but through these channels. And if you're in one of those channels, there's nowhere to run. There's nowhere to get away from the water. These narrow canyons become a valley of death. George Lamsa, in his book, Shepherd of All, writes that the valleys of the shadow of death are paths which wind in between mountains where there are dark shadows and deep gorges. Travelers march slowly and silently in order to avoid being seen or heard by bandits. The fear of death is constantly on their minds. They tremble, they expect trouble or death at any time while they're passing through. I've never been to Jordan, I've never been to Petra, but I have been to a place of darkness where the walls closed in and I felt fear. I got to tell you, this is no secret. I am a bit claustrophobic, okay? Let me show you this picture. This next one is a picture of the caverns in Missouri. All right, in this picture, you can see there are people standing there. There's a walkway, a little rail or a chain guard around the side that you can kind of see your pathway. And it looks like there's lots of room to stand and lots of room for people to kind of walk through there. And that's a great place right there. But we went on a tour for some crazy reason while we were in Missouri for my younger brother's graduation from medical school. I don't know who all went, but I will always remember my experience of going through these caverns. I pictured the high ceilings. I pictured the stalactites and the stalagmites and all the colors and all the beauty. And they had all kinds of bright lights down there. And there was waterfalls and a little river underground. All these things were gorgeous. But we went on this little walking tour, and as we're walking along on this path, we started out like a sidewalk with a rail on each side or like a chain along the sides on these posts that you could hold on to. And it was great until it got narrower and narrower. And I didn't like it. You had to turn sideways and kind of like squeeze through one at a time. And I know there have been people that have gone through this tour, millions of them. But in my mind, what if they're wrong? What if this doesn't get wider 10 feet up there or 20 feet up there? What if it just keeps getting narrower and I get stuck? There was another place where we had to kind of bend over and kind of lean through because the ceiling came down really low. And in my mind, all I can picture is this ceiling is going to go all the way to the floor and I'm not going to get back out of here. I'm going to be stuck because there are people behind me. Well, I'm not a sheep, but I didn't like it, okay? What I realized in that environment for me, and I am not ashamed to say this, fear can be paralyzing. In those physical places where I can't move, I find that fear to be overwhelming. It can paralyze me. And the thing is, there are places in our lives and there are times in our lives when things close in on us and we become so pressed on every side that it feels like we can't even catch our breath. It feels like we're being squeezed from every side. The pressure can come at you from every angle. It can feel like there's not enough room to stand up and walk, like you're going to have to get down and crawl. And even then, there's not enough room for you to get through with what you've got to do. This can happen to all of us or any of us at any point in our lives. Our circumstances can take us there. The thing about sheep that we kind of have in common with them, sheep are kind of defenseless. When they get afraid, when they're in panic mode, they're lost or they're caught or whatever, and they're just in freak out mode, they have a problem because they're defenseless. Cats have claws, dogs have teeth, horses can kick, bears can bite and they can claw, deer can even run. But sheep have no game. They can't bite, claw, outrun any serious predator. The sheep's only security is the shepherd. And that leads to David's next line, and it's why he doesn't fear. It's the second half of verse 4. He says, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. The sheep's only defense and their only offense is the shepherd. A shepherd in David's day would carry a rod. Is about a 2.5-foot club, usually carved out of a piece of wood, something that they would have pulled from a part of a tree that would have a big knot on one end. So that knot would form the end of the club, and the smaller end would be the handle. The shepherd would often find little pieces of scraps of metal and embed those pieces of metal into that wood on that knotty end. And what it would do is it would add a little weight to it. It also added some strength to it. It added some real destructive power to the end of this club with these pieces of metal sticking out of it. Well, if a predator came after the sheep, something like a wolf or a bear would come after the sheep, they're bigger than the sheep. And they would rise up, you would see them above the sheep. So the shepherd could actually throw his club over top of the sheep, over the backs of the sheep, and he could hit the predator, hopefully in the head or something, to knock it out, to either knock it out or injure it or something. That club would be a pretty formidable weapon. And that was about the only weapon that the shepherd would carry. But the other thing that he carried was a staff. It was, or a crook sometimes it was called. It's basically like you've seen in the pictures. It's a long rod, a long piece of a branch that has like a curved end, like a hook on the one end. And the shepherd would use that when he was climbing. He would also use it to direct the sheep when they huddle all around him. It's long enough to reach over and guide the sheep that's closest to you in the right direction. You can kind of steer them with that. It's usually about 5 feet long or so, and the shepherd is never, ever without it. He don't go anywhere without that staff. When a lamb can't scramble down from a ledge or it falls down into a crevice, the shepherd can use his staff to either kind of like gently lift it up or to grab underneath one of the legs or like by the shoulder and kind of move it back up onto the path so it can gain its footing and get back underway. So the shepherd carried this rod, the club, for protecting the flock from external threats. He also carried the staff for directing the flock in its daily grazing, in its travels as it walked. The sight of those two tools would be comforting to the sheep. Next statement David makes is found in verse 5. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. In this verse, David makes a shift from being a sheep to a guest. And in his mind, God moves from being a shepherd to a host. To prepare a table means to prepare a meal. And in traditional Middle Eastern society, people eat without plates or utensils. Everyone takes a piece of flatbread and they tear off a small piece. And then they use that flatbread to lift the food up from the common dish that everybody's eating from to their mouth. It's actually more sanitary than our way of using a fork or spoon and putting that in our mouth and then taking it back out and putting it on a plate. Each bite starts with a fresh piece of bread. There's nothing to do to really set the table. So this host, my host, prepares my meal in the presence of my enemies. People who are hostile to me. That's what enemies mean. The host knows that if he prepares a meal for me, the people that are watching, who are hostile to me, are going to become hostile toward him too, right? He's fixing me something to eat. He's fixing me something to eat in front of them, and they don't like me, so they're not going to like him. But he doesn't care. He loves me enough to not care whether or not he is approved or has the approval of the people around me that don't like me. Excellent hosts in the Middle East do more than serve you food, though. They make your stay at their home pleasant. One way they do that is they wash your feet. The second is they anoint your head with oil, pouring a sweet-smelling lotion on you that makes you feel good all over. It would probably have helped a lot in a pre-deodorant culture like David lived in. In Jesus' day, he had his feet anointed by a lady named Mary at a banquet during Holy Week. She didn't feel worthy of pouring oil on his head, so she poured the oil on his feet, and she dried it with her hair. Well, as David's host pours oil on his head, the enemies that are present, that are watching, same enemies that watched him prepare the food, they're now watching as he pours the oil on your head, and they're furious. See, David knows his host is sparing no effort to make this one that these others are hating feel special. And if that's not bad enough, there are waiters that are hovering around him so that every time he takes a sip of his wine, they refill his cup. It's overflowing. He can never drink it down. David thinks then about his life. He thinks about his life and he sees it for what it is. It's a walking adventure with a shepherd / host who cares for his every need, and everywhere he leads him. David's saying, I'm never going to complain again. With my God, it's always an overflowing cup. It's always the best robe. It's always the fattened calf. It's always joy unspeakable. Maybe your life is this way too. If the Lord is your shepherd, and this is your psalm, this is your promise, because this is your life. During the times when you walk through your valleys of shadow and death, you don't have to fear evil. Your shepherd is with you. He carries a rod to protect you and a staff to direct you. He prepares your daily food even while your enemies are watching. He pours oil on your head, and he never lets your cup get empty. As David thinks about how God has always cared for him, and he thinks about his future, and then he makes this final statement in verse 6. He says, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. This is the shepherd sheep image again. It's evening and the shepherd is leading you home. As it gets dark, he stations his assistant at the rear of the herd so that no wolf can attack. If the shepherd has a dog, he sends him back to the back of the flock as well. And as the shepherd leads from the front, his dog and the helper back at the back watch over you from behind. They're the rear guard. David says, the two guards that God has stationed to follow me home are goodness and mercy. They follow me all the days of my life. I'm never without them. If the Lord is your shepherd, you're not being followed by evil. You're being followed by goodness and mercy all the days of your life. And if that's not enough, because the shepherd is also a host, he's prepared a place for you, and it's called heaven. You're going to live in that house with him forever. You know, I think this is really a good song. Better than like a Rolling Stone or I Can't Get No Satisfaction. It's better than any of those. Because you see, if the Lord is your shepherd, you are known, you are loved, you are prepared for and cared for, and you have satisfaction every day and forever. Let's read that first verse one more time. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. 9 words. But you know what the most important word is out of all those 9? It's one of the smallest. It's the little word, my. Lots of people know that the Lord is a shepherd. Lots know that he is the shepherd, but not everyone knows him as their shepherd. So what do we do with this? That's actually today's life application, and it's this. You can only follow one shepherd. So who are you following? Is it your husband, your wife, your pastor, a parent, a close friend? You see, no one can shepherd you like the great shepherd, Jesus. I have had some time in the past week to reflect on a lot of things while I was off sick, stuck at home, kind of shut in and with time to think and pray and read my Bible. And one of the things that has often crossed my mind over the years has been the number of people that come and go through a church. They're there for a season and they leave for one reason or another. And our church is no different than any other church. And as I was studying this 23rd Psalm this week and really kind of getting my heart and my head around this concept and the depth of this truth of how my life is shaped and the outcome of my days affected by the fact that he is my shepherd. I thought about this application of people applying this to their lives and really embracing the concept of Jesus being the shepherd and their need for allowing him to be that shepherd. You see, we like to feel good. We like to be around people that like us. We like to hear favorable things. We like to hear encouraging things. We like to hear positive things. I get that. But we need to listen for the voice of our shepherd. I'm afraid that too often we listen for the voices of people around us. We allow other people to be a substitute for our shepherd. It might be a pastor. It might be friends. It might be people at a church. It might be someone that you work with. It might be someone in your family or just a close friend. The problem is all of us, me included, we're all part of the herd. We're all sheep. I understand my role as a pastor to teach and to encourage and to inform and to pray and support in those kinds of ways the people that are around me. I get that. But I am not the good shepherd. There is one shepherd, and it's Jesus. The best I can do is point you to him. You see, I'm going to disappoint you. I'm going to fail you. I'm going to let you down. I'm going to make mistakes. The reason I know that I'm going to do this is because I do it to myself. I'm a sheep. I need the shepherd myself. And so as I commit to following this shepherd and do my best to keep him front and center and to listen for his voice and to listen for his words and to follow his guidance and to follow his lead into the places that he is leading me to be, alongside of you, my prayer is that all of us will listen for his voice. You see, if we're all listening to his voice, we should hear something pretty similar, wouldn't you think? If we're all listening for his voice, the instruction that we receive and the guidance we receive should all be pretty similar. But I'm afraid that in today's world, today's culture, that's not very popular. We like people to agree with us. We like people to see things our way. We like political parties that agree with us. We like elected leaders that agree with us. We like pastors in churches that agree with us. We like the style of everything to be the way we like it to be, from the music to the Bible translation to what's on the screens to the color of the carpet, you name it. We like things to be the way we like them. And my question is, where in all of those things is the voice of the shepherd? My prayer today for each one of us is that we would each find a place where we can say with conviction, I follow Jesus. Then, like David, you can say, the Lord is my shepherd. And you can also say, like David, therefore I shall not want, because he takes care of me. He supplies everything that I need. He is the one that I will follow from here to eternity. If the Lord's not your shepherd today, you can change that, and only you can change it. He won't force his way into your life. It's something that you have to do. You have to open the door and invite him in. Let's pray together. Thank you, Lord, for watching, protecting, for caring and loving me throughout my life here on earth and preparing me for an eternity in heaven. You truly are a good shepherd. God, I pray that each one of us today would surrender our lives to your guidance, to your protection, and most of all, God, to your lordship, as we faithfully and wholeheartedly follow you. Amen.